to know why Jamaica run from the Federation. Well, they want to know why Jamaica run away from the Federation. Jamaica have a right to speak she mind. That is my opinion.
What I remember about Federation was the romance of it within our family. The idea, which has left me as a lifelong Federationist. I would never enter politics for any other reason than Federation. My grandfather so believed in it. I still believe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. People tell me it would never have worked. When you think of why it didn't work, it didn't work because the islands broke down and couldn't get on. It didn't work because my grandfather's cousin was trying to get power in Jamaica and outwitted my grandfather, Bustamante. But honestly, the light died in him when Federation died. He never ever came back from that. I know that. From World War I, and I believe that the camaraderie that developed in England, not just during World War I, II, the Students' Union, that was a movement in England where there was a great consciousness of the other islands. They all made friends and knew each other. And I have no doubt at all that the First World War was why I went into politics. I think a lot of independent countries are independent now because of the treatment of both the volunteer armies from the Caribbean and the black soldiers from within England. He signed up in England, and the story of how they treated him and his brother as black soldiers. And when he was going to be an officer, I mean, he couldn't even eat in the same dining room. He wouldn't have been able to use the same bathroom. So he said to hell with that and just went and became a gunner. But that experience, and then losing his younger brother Roy, who had been terribly upset about the treatment of black soldiers. And there was this big thing in Toronto. I can't remember who they were fighting against.
It was in Italy.
Yes. And this thing so appalled him, and he was so troubled by it. So when he died, I think my grandfather kind of just lifted that cause. But you know, he would have, I don't know, he was a great admirer of Eric, but I don't think I think Eric and him had come to the idea of Federation quite separately and met as like-minded people. I don't think they influenced each other over it. I think they'd come their separate paths. Interestingly, I think both from Oxford. I think Eric was in Oxford too, younger. And he went into politics and, you know, was fighting for adult suffrage and everything. We always heard about the possibility of a federation in the house. I remember he had this hurricane map, and that's how he would talk to me about it. He would say, you know, under here it's an archipelago. It looks separate here, but underneath is one solid landmass. And behind us is one solid history. It made total sense to him. And then I think the economic part of it would have been more my father's interest, more that generation's interest. I think it was more visceral at the time, and we'd all come away from this experience and been horrified by how the British had literally scorned people willing to die for Blighty. It was unbelievable. Well, I remember my grandfather saying how the same people who were scorning him would come to him to write the love letters to their partners and or their wives, and I think the confidence of knowing that they were so much better educated, probably so much smarter, but one can't make that assumption. They definitely changed the Caribbean. I mean, our modern Caribbean is because of these people. If my grandmother was sitting beside me, she would say the light more went out when he lost the election after the federal. I don't know if I'm being romantic, and my grandmother told him not to call that referendum. She was very, well, she was his first cousin, and she was Buster's first cousin. So she was like a kind of in between the two of them. She was much more canny than my grandfather, much more intuitive. And she told him, do not call a referendum. Just wait till it settles and people get an idea of it. But you know, he had been so affected by Buster. They had wanted him to lead the federation. You know, Barbados was a compromise because both Trinidad or Jamaica should have got it. So they chose Barbados. And then NW or Eric should have led it. But Grantley led it. And as a result of that, it didn't have the strength as an entity. I don't think he would have shared with my grandmother as much emotionally as he might have, not shared, but maybe I would have glimpsed more of his pain than her, because he had to be quite stoic about it, because he had really defied her to go ahead and call it. And in fact, I don't know if you know, if I've written this somewhere, I think I may have. She had done a piece called Growth that was about 3 horses climbing. It was a totem pole, 3 horses climbing, and then 3 men climbing together, and then 3 men going this way together, and they get up, and at the top of and then there's another layer which I think is 3 horses, and at the top is this figurehead of a godhead. And the symbolism behind it was that you can't tie horses together. You can't, if you want them to be creative, noble beings and reach some high state of being, you cannot tether them. I think basically, I'm not certain that she was a federationist. I mean, she had been through so much to become a Jamaican. She was half Jamaican, but she had thrown her whole lot in, given up her English heritage and art to be the mother of Jamaican art, to be everything. I believe deep down, she never said it, that federation was a question for her. It was not for him. And I think the way that it ended, that he did not truly believe that the people wanted to end. In other words, they had voted against it by tiny, it was not like a landslide. And what they believed was what Buster had frightened them with, the rural areas, because all the urban areas voted for it. It was the rural areas, which are less educated or were then. And I think he believed Buster had said to them things like, you know, we are the mother pig. All these little sucklings are going to draw us down to nothing. They're going to bleed us of all our money and our wealth and our natural resources. And I think his sorrow was that the very adult suffrage, the very general vote that he had fought for and would die for the principle of it, had defeated him because somebody clever had taken advantage, who was much better at talking to simple people than he was. Because I mean, to hear my grandfather talk, they just nodded, but I don't think they understood half of what he said. He conceptualized. I mean, at the dining table to children, you know, it was always concept. And I think that was his sadness, that it was not a fair defeat, and that it could have worked. That if he did go, Buster would have just annihilated him at home. And not only Buster, his own party, Wilso Isaacs, was just waiting in the wings to take over the party. He was a dead man if he left, because he didn't have my father's mass appeal. My father had carried a lot of the things he did because the majority of the people just adored him, and he was able to speak their language and get through his concepts. My grandfather, I think they admired and were proud of, but I think any clever politician could have undermined him, because he couldn't lie, he couldn't cheat. He was just this honorable man, which in politics can be a great encumbrance. So he could not, he was stuck. If he left, and if they defeated him, they were going to bring down the Federation. His own party weren't all for Federation. I don't think Wills was. I can't speak for him, but the way I read it and the way I've heard them in the family read it over the years was that he was in this mind that whatever he did, he was kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if Buster didn't get him, Wills was going to get him in his own party. So he would have not had any platform anyway. So he played it the only way he thought he could. And that's why my grandmother said, but don't call the referendum. Just wait until the general election. People will have become accustomed. Maybe they wouldn't have. But she felt it was, and then to lose the general election after, well, she thought that's what it was, a general. Now, my father didn't think it was either that killed Norman. He thought party just got bored after he was not in national politics. He was bored to death with law and too old to start again and in frail health. So Daddy saw it more as, I think Daddy would have thought that maybe if he'd gone and had an affair, he would have felt better. But I am fairly certain I am right. He was a kind of man that I think since the First World War, he had been driven by a design of independence. That was his vision. And really his gift was taking that design out of his head and putting it into the head of the Jamaican people. Because really people understood to that extent what independence meant to them. I'm not saying all the other islands didn't understand, given their leaders and whatever, but in Jamaica it was definitely N.W. Manley that put that idea in their heads. The reason I wrote that chapter on the hurricane tells you more about his personality than anything else in that book. He had built that house. He had measured the nails. He had measured the boards. He had measured the foundations. It was just 2 rooms up and down then. And he knew that mathematically a Hurricane 5 hurricane could not topple it. He knew that. And he was the Lee Prizeman winner at Oxford for maths. He was a brilliant mathematician. People don't know this. Mathematicians would bring him problems to solve when they were absolutely stumped. He just had a brilliant mathematical mind. So he knew. So he takes up his wife, his granddaughter, an array of friends of my cousin Norman, and he sticks us it was Hurricane Charlie, I think, a Category 5 hurricane, and the eye was passing over the Blue Mountains. He takes us up there, and he was so certain and so excited to prove his point that all of us as children, we just thought it was the biggest, most wonderful adventure. All these Macintoshes are all over the ceiling, keeping the rain out. And my grandmother and Miss Boyd, the housekeeper, are literally just praying. They were driven to prayer. And there was nothing going to vary him from the knowledge and certainty that there was nothing to be afraid, because he had done his maths. He was a risk taker. He was a risk taker. That is for certain. And I guess he took a risk with the Federation and it did not pay off. But my grandmother's irritation was that she had told him not to. He would never have tricked the people, but I think he could have waited till the election without being morally wrong. You know, I think because he was a stubborn person. He was a very stubborn person once he got an idea in his head. And it may have been because Buster was raising such hell about it and people were getting, maybe he himself was beginning to doubt whether people wanted it. I don't know. It was such an unfair election. It was not on issues. It was unfair. That it was really heartbreaking. And then I don't think it helped when his great friend Eric made the comment, 1 from 10 leaves nothing. That hurt him profoundly. Not hurt him, offended him. The truth of it weighed on him, knowing that they couldn't do it without Jamaica. They just couldn't. And then you look at the little Eastern Caribbean doing so well with their arrangement. Of course we could have had federation. Of course we could have. We'd have been so powerful in the world. I remember I was talking to a Jamaican PNP politician, somebody that I have a great affection and admiration for. And he was almost appalled that I still spoke of federation. He said, "You must be crazy, but you're an intelligent person. That can never happen." No, there's a completely liberal PNP-minded, there's a kind of, the world falls into these conservatives and liberals, and well, now it's gone crazy, but, and I suddenly realized people really don't feel, intelligent, sensitive people really don't feel it could happen. I think it could. But that is another question. That is a question of not trusting your own. That's a question of not thinking you're capable. I mean, it's unbelievable. You want independence. You believe in yourself. These nationalistic places. You can't have your own, the highest judgment of a court. You can't believe in your own integrity. Well, give me a break. It's if you don't have that, but you must believe you have that. I don't know, but I am persuaded that I will not see any movement towards it in my lifetime, which won't be very long, but I still hope. I guess because I'm a writer, I see things in pictures, in metaphors. My sister-in-law was recently in a terrible accident. She fought for her life. She's doing okay now, but it was very touch and go. And it was in Montego Bay, and the Montego Bay Cornwall Hospital, there's a reason for this story. The Cornwall Hospital is closed for renovation, so they didn't have very much, just a little shack at the back looking after people. And at the time, Mario Rubio was in Kingston trying to convince Prime Minister Holness that he should get rid of the Cuban doctors and nurses because it was human trafficking. While he was in that meeting, there was a Cuban doctor who was pumping air into my sister-in-law's lungs because there was no ventilator. And he wouldn't leave because if you change the rhythm, you can cause a lot of problems, strokes and things. He sat there for 20 hours till they could get her to Kingston, pumping my sister-in-law's heart, while Mario Rubio is ordering. And it to me, that just says it all. This wonderful Cuban health system that has just rescued us over and over. COVID, I mean, what we would have done without them in COVID. And so maybe this will be an outside force, I don't know, that'll make us, I don't know. I think you have to have the will. And I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, there's so much argument over CARICOM and tariffs or things or this or that. I mean, it has been so contentious that I don't know if it has helped. Absolutely. Not my grandmother, my grandfather. But he was the lap upon which I built my life. The loss of him was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me in my whole life. I've never recovered from it. I went to pieces. I never started really seriously writing till Drumler. I used to write poems, which is really the lazy way for a prose writer to say they've done some work. But I wasn't a poet. And I just couldn't get my life together. That's probably all the marriages, all the craziness. I just couldn't get my life together. I'd lost my compass. He was so, in such an immediate way. But he left things in me, because when I did get myself together, sort of really after my grandmother died, I had to pull my life together. He was there, all the markers were there. It left all to this day, but it's just the markers are in there. Paddy would not like me to do that. Paddy would tell me to do that. It's just everywhere. And I think he did so for my father too, but politically. I think politically, you know, if Daddy did something to so-and-so, he would always relate it back to would NW be pleased. And NW was far more left-wing than people realized. So people hurling at my father that he was too left-wing, his father would be disappointed. His father would be perfectly happy. You know, they were Fabian socialists. They were very left-wing.